I am Julian, 32 years old. For 3 decades, I watched my family throw lavish, country club-style parties for my older brother while treating my very existence like an administrative error they were forced to tolerate. But while I was sitting entirely alone in my dark, silent apartment on my 32nd birthday, eating a stale slice of grocery store cake with a plastic fork, my parents were right across town raising expensive champagne to my brother's new promotion. They called him the absolute pride of the family legacy. They laughed and celebrated with dozens of extended family members, completely forgetting I even existed on the day I was born. But there is one major thing they did not know. I had just received an $82,000 performance bonus from my corporate firm, and I was about to use it to buy a piece of prime real estate that would shatter their perfect, manufactured family illusion forever. And right now, they are the ones desperately blowing up my phone, begging for my attention and demanding answers they are not prepared to hear. Before I tell you exactly what happened and how I finally destroyed the golden child dynamic, hit that like button if you believe in absolute justice. And do not forget to let me know exactly where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let us go back to where it all started. I stood on the expansive cedar deck of my newly purchased 4-bedroom lake house in rural Michigan. The late September wind coming off the water was crisp, carrying the sharp scent of mature pine trees and the intoxicating aroma of absolute freedom. I held a heavy crystal glass of expensive Pinot Noir in my right hand. The glass caught the fading golden hour light, casting a ruby reflection on the weathered wooden railing. For the first time in my entire adult life, my chest did not feel tight with that familiar, suffocating anxiety. I did not feel the desperate, clawing need to please people who were biologically incapable of seeing my worth. I set my wine glass down carefully, pulled my phone from the pocket of my jeans, and opened my social media. I scrolled through my camera roll and selected a single, carefully framed photo. It was nothing flashy or overly produced. It was just a wide shot of the glittering blue surface of Lake Michigan, the immaculate edge of my new wooden deck, and my feet kicked up casually on a brand new Adirondack chair I had assembled myself that morning. I tapped the screen and typed a simple, devastating caption. Weekend at my new lake house. Birthday gift to myself. I hit post. I did not tag my parents. I did not tag my brother Oliver. I did not add any passive-aggressive emojis or long explanations. I just let the image out into the digital wind, turned my phone screen face down on the wood, and watched the sun dip below the horizon. The sky exploded into violent shades of amber, violet, and crushed rose. It took exactly 14 minutes for the grand illusion of my family's indifference to shatter completely. When I finally flipped my phone over to check the time, the screen was a chaotic, blinding waterfall of urgent notifications. 17 missed calls, 32 text messages, and they were still pouring in, vibrating against the wooden railing like a swarm of angry hornets whose nest had just been kicked over. My mother, Eleanor, had called 8 times in a span of 15 minutes. I watched her contact photo flash on the screen again. I did not answer. I just watched it ring out, feeling a dark, profound sense of satisfaction spreading through my veins. When the screen went dark again, I opened the text threads to survey the damage. The very first message was from my father, Arthur. It read, in his typical commanding tone, "Where did you get the money for a house? Answer me immediately. Your mother is having a severe panic attack in the living room. People are calling us." The next thread was from my Aunt Beatrice, the family's self-appointed moral compass and chief gossip architect. "Julian, this is completely irresponsible and erratic behavior. People in our social circle are asking questions we cannot possibly answer. How do you think this makes the family look? Call your father right now before you do irreparable damage to your reputation." Then came a massive block of text from Oliver, my golden child older brother, the man who had never been told no in his entire 35 years on this earth. "What the hell is wrong with you? Mom is crying hysterically. You better not have taken out some shady, high-interest loan just to show off. Dad says you need to sell this property immediately before you embarrass us in front of his golf club friends. Delete that post right now." I leaned back in my chair, looked out at the darkening water, and laughed out loud. It was a deep, resonant sound that startled a bird resting in the nearby pines. For 32 years, I had been practically invisible to these people. I was the permanent backup plan, the afterthought, the reliable son they only ever remembered when they needed someone to handle the heavy lifting, fix a complex technical issue with their home network, or quietly disappear into the background so Oliver could stand in the spotlight. They treated my personal milestones like a funeral, burying them under silence and excuses, while treating Oliver's everyday, mediocre achievements like a national holiday. They did not care about my financial well-being. They did not care if I was happy or fulfilled. They only cared about their carefully curated public image. They cared about control. Buying this piece of real estate was not just a financial transaction for me. It was a massive, undeniable declaration of independence. It was concrete proof that I could build a life, a highly successful and lucrative one, completely outside of their suffocating shadow. I silenced the phone entirely, switching it to airplane mode, and slipped it back into my pocket. The frantic, desperate buzzing finally stopped. The silence that followed, accompanied only by the sound of the gentle waves hitting my private dock, was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. To truly understand why this specific moment felt like taking a massive, desperate breath of air after drowning for a lifetime, you have to understand the toxic environment I barely survived. You have to understand the decades of quiet humiliation, the relentless financial manipulation, and the exact sequence of events that pushed a loyal, desperate son to finally sever the heavy iron chains of family obligation. I thought the worst part of my life was already behind me. I thought buying the house would be the end of the war. I was so incredibly wrong. It was a bleak Tuesday evening in downtown Chicago. The rain was coming down in relentless, freezing gray sheets, matching the exact bone-deep exhaustion seeping into my muscles. I was officially 32 years old today. I had just finished a brutal, mind-numbing 14-hour workday at the marketing and crisis management firm where I operated as a senior strategy director. It had been a day from hell. One of our biggest corporate clients was facing a massive public relations disaster and a potential multimillion-dollar lawsuit over a leaked internal document. I had spent the entire day in a windowless conference room, skipping lunch, surviving on black coffee and adrenaline, aggressively negotiating with their legal team and drafting a press strategy that ultimately saved their stock price from tanking. The CEO of my firm had personally shaken my hand before I left, his eyes wide with genuine relief. But as I rode the elevator up to my apartment building, listening to the soft, sterile hum of the machinery, the high of the professional victory rapidly faded into a familiar, hollow ache. I checked my phone for the 20th time that hour. My screen remained perfectly, stubbornly blank. 0 text messages. 0 missed calls from my family. I unlocked the heavy door to my apartment. It was impeccably decorated, modern, clean, and filled with expensive art. But tonight, it felt like a sterile cavern. On the massive granite kitchen island sat a small, pathetic chocolate cake I had bought for myself at a crowded bakery near the office during a 10-minute break. A single, unlit blue candle stood in the center, leaning slightly to the left, mocking me with its sad presence. "Happy birthday to me," I whispered to the empty room, the sound of my own voice making me feel even more pathetic. I tossed my keys on the counter, stripped off my wetsuit jacket, and loosened my tie. I walked over to the oversized leather couch and collapsed. I told myself it did not matter. I was a grown, independent man pulling in a massive salary, managing high-stakes corporate accounts, and living in a luxury building. I did not need balloons, streamers, and a chorus of happy birthdays to validate my existence. But the rational, adult mind rarely controls the wounded inner child who just wants his parents to pick up the phone and remember the day he was brought into the world. Hoping to distract myself from the crushing silence, I flipped open my laptop and logged into my social media accounts. The very first post at the absolute top of my feed froze the air in my lungs. It was a high-resolution, professional-quality photograph of my older brother, Oliver. He was standing in the center of an upscale, highly exclusive steakhouse, wearing a custom-tailored Italian suit, holding a crystal glass of champagne. Behind him hung a massive, glittering gold banner that read, "Congratulations on your promotion, Oliver." My father had his arm draped proudly, heavily over Oliver's shoulder. His chest was puffed out, his face radiating the kind of intense, glowing paternal pride I had only ever seen in movies and television commercials. My mother stood on Oliver's other side, beaming with pure, unfiltered adoration, literally wiping a tear of joy from her perfectly manicured cheek. The timestamp on the post showed the photos were uploaded exactly 4 hours ago. Right in the middle of my birthday. I scrolled down mechanically, my hand cold on the trackpad. There were dozens of pictures. It was not just an intimate family dinner. It was a massive, orchestrated gathering. Aunts, uncles, cousins I had not seen since before the pandemic, prominent family friends from the country club. Every single person who mattered in the Hayes family orbit was there, smiling, drinking, and celebrating. My father had written the caption himself. "So incredibly proud of our superstar today. Oliver has just been officially named Chief Financial Officer at his firm. The Hayes family legacy continues in strong, capable hands. Hard work always pays off." My mother had commented directly below it. "He is our greatest blessing. A true leader." My hands actually trembled as I pushed the laptop away from me. They did not forget my birthday. Forgetting implies an accident, a slip of the mind, a busy schedule. They simply chose to pour all their time, energy, and massive financial resources into celebrating Oliver's promotion instead. I was not even an afterthought. I was entirely, deliberately erased from the family calendar. The old, deep wounds ripped open instantly, bleeding fresh, agonizing memories into the quiet apartment. I closed my eyes and remembered sitting entirely alone at a sticky table by the window of a cheap pizza parlor on my 11th birthday. I watched the streetlights flicker on in the dusk, waiting for my parents to pick me up from an after-school program. They had promised they would be there by 5 o'clock sharp for dinner. At 8 o'clock, a tired waitress took pity on me, brought me a free slice of cherry pie, and let me use the landline. My parents finally showed up at 9:30, irritated, rushing, and completely unapologetic, explaining they simply had to stay for the entirety of Oliver's regional debate tournament and the celebratory dinner afterward. I remembered my high school graduation dinner, where my father spent the entire 2 hours talking loudly to the waiter and the surrounding tables about Oliver's prestigious college fraternity. I remembered the exact day I got my acceptance letter to a top-tier university, a moment I had worked toward for 4 grueling years. My parents sat me down at the kitchen table and coldly informed me they had drained the remaining college fund to pay for Oliver's extravagant destination wedding to his wife, Sarah. They told me I would need to take out massive student loans and get a job if I wanted to attend. I remembered my own college graduation dinner. It was supposed to be my one night of recognition, but right before the expensive appetizers arrived, Oliver stood up, tapped his glass, and announced he and Sarah were buying their first luxury home. The conversation immediately hijacked my milestone. My father even pulled out his checkbook and offered to cover their closing costs right there at the table, completely ignoring my degree sitting in the folder on the chair next to me. My phone ringing violently on the granite counter snapped me back to the present reality. I looked at the screen. It was my mother. For one foolish, pathetic, desperate second, my heart leaped against my ribs. Maybe she realized the date. Maybe she was calling to apologize profusely, to sing happy birthday, to tell me she loved me and that they had saved a piece of cake for me. I cleared my throat, forcing the emotion down, and answered, "Hey, Mom. Julian, thank goodness I finally caught you." Her voice bubbled through the speaker, frantic, sharp, and entirely self-important. "Listen to me, your brother's actual promotion anniversary party is going to be a huge, catered event next month at the country club. Sarah is completely overwhelmed with the guest list. I need you to step in and handle all the catering logistics. You do marketing or whatever it is you do, so you are good at negotiating with vendors." She did not ask how I was. She did not say hello. She just immediately assigned me an unpaid administrative task to serve Oliver's glory. "Mom," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears, Do you have any idea what today is? There was a brief, irritated pause on the other end of the line. It is Tuesday, Julian. The vendors need their non-refundable deposits by Thursday morning, so you have to move fast on this. No, Mom. Today is my birthday. I turned 32 today. The silence stretched over the cellular connection. It was not a silence of deep, heartbreaking regret. It was the awkward, inconvenient silence of someone caught in a minor social faux pas at a cocktail party. Oh, honey. Well, with Oliver's big news and all the planning, it just completely slipped my mind. You know how stressful it is managing your father's schedule and the HOA meetings in the neighborhood. Happy belated birthday. Anyway, about the caterers, I need you to secure the tiered seafood tower. Oliver loves shrimp. Something deep, foundational inside my chest finally snapped. It was not a loud, dramatic break. It was the quiet, definitive snapping of a thick, rusted steel chain that had held me down for decades. Do not worry about it, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a calm, icy register I did not even recognize as my own. I am not handling the catering. I have my own actual career to manage. Julian, do not be difficult right now. Family supports family. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I did not throw the device against the wall. I set it down gently on the counter. Exactly 3 seconds later, a notification chimed. I opened an email from the executive board of my firm. It was the official, finalized confirmation of my performance bonus for saving the massive corporate account that afternoon. $82,000 after taxes, deposited directly into my checking account. I looked at the massive number on the screen. Then I looked at the dark screen of my phone. The very next morning, I was sitting at my desk reviewing analytics reports when my phone buzzed with a brand new group message thread. It was titled Hayes Family Updates. I had never been included in this group chat before. I quickly realized my mother, who was notoriously terrible with technology, had accidentally added my number while trying to add my Aunt Beatrice's new work phone line. The messages loaded in real time, sprawling across my screen like a digital crime scene, exposing everything. My father wrote, "The venue is booked. We need to lock in the primary gift. I think a massive down payment on that luxury SUV Oliver has been looking at is appropriate for a CFO. I am putting in $20,000 from the joint account." Aunt Beatrice replied immediately, "That is wonderful, Arthur. Oliver deserves it. He is a true provider." Then, my mother's message appeared, the words burning into my retinas. "I will tell Julian he needs to contribute significantly. He is single and does not have a real family to support. He should put in at least $20,000. It is time he supports the family for once instead of being so notoriously selfish with his salary." I stared at the screen, my jaw tight. She literally spelled my name wrong. Julian. My own mother, spelling my name with an E instead of an A, while actively conspiring with my father to extort me to buy a luxury car for the brother who already had everything handed to him on a silver platter. I screenshotted the entire thread, sending it to a secure cloud folder. I did not reply. I just locked my phone and placed it in my bottom desk drawer. The boiling anger was completely gone. In its place was a cold, ruthless, calculating clarity. I felt exactly like a high-powered lawyer building an airtight, undeniable case for a massive, scorched earth lawsuit. They wanted $20,000 from me at Sunday dinner. They had absolutely no idea what kind of storm was actually coming to the table. The Hayes family mansion loomed over the perfectly manicured, tree-lined suburban street, a sprawling monument to my father's lifelong obsession with wealth and appearances. The 3-story stone facade looked less like a home and more like a medieval fortress designed to keep the unworthy out. For my entire life, crossing this specific threshold meant automatically shrinking myself down, folding my personality into a small, quiet box to fit their rigid narrative. Tonight, however, I walked up the sweeping aggregate driveway with my shoulders pulled back, my spine straight, completely indifferent to the heavy oak doors that usually filled me with dread. Inside, the formal dining room was a scene of calculated, oppressive perfection. My mother was nervously fussing with a massive, expensive centerpiece of white lilies that smelled vaguely like a funeral home. My father was pouring himself a generous measure of aged scotch from his heavy crystal decanter, the ice clinking loudly in the quiet room. Oliver and his picture-perfect wife, Sarah, sat on the tufted velvet sofa, sipping wine and looking exactly like they had stepped out of a luxury lifestyle catalog. No one stood up to hug me when I entered. My father did not even look up from his drink. He merely nodded toward the long mahogany dining table. "You are late, Julian. Sit down." I checked my watch deliberately. "I am exactly on time, Arthur." My father's hand froze holding the decanter. His eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. I had never, in 32 years, called him by his first name. He set his glass down a little too hard, the liquid sloshing over the rim. "We have important family financial matters to discuss." Dinner was an absolute masterclass in psychological torture and subtle degradation. For 45 agonizing minutes, the entire conversation revolved entirely around Oliver's sheer brilliance. They discussed his new corner office layout, his impressive stock options, and his brilliant, supposedly groundbreaking financial strategies. I ate my prime rib in absolute, terrifying silence, watching the performance unfold like a poorly written play. Finally, the expensive dessert was served, and my father cleared his throat, tapping his heavy silver spoon against his china coffee cup to demand absolute attention. "Julian," he began, employing his best, most condescending corporate boardroom voice. "As you know, we are throwing a highly significant celebration for your brother next month. We expect everyone in this family to pull their weight and contribute to his success. You have no mortgage, no children, and practically zero living expenses compared to a family man. We have decided your contribution to Oliver's vehicle gift fund will be $20,000. Have it wired directly to my checking account by Tuesday afternoon." He did not ask if I could afford it. He did not ask if I was willing. He commanded it like a king taxing a peasant. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water, set the glass down exactly in the center of the coaster, and looked directly, unblinkingly, into my father's eyes. No. The silence that descended upon the dining room was absolute and deafening. You could clearly hear the antique grandfather clock ticking in the grand hallway. "Excuse me?" my father breathed, his face rapidly turning the alarming color of a bruised plum. "I said no," I repeated, my voice incredibly steady, completely devoid of any fear or emotion. "I am not giving you a single solitary cent for Oliver's party, let alone $20,000 of my hard-earned salary." My mother gasped loudly, clutching her pearl necklace in a theatrical, practiced display of shock. "Julian, how can you be so incredibly selfish? After everything this family has sacrificed and done for you? What exactly have you done for me, Mom?" I asked smoothly, leaning forward, resting my forearms on the table. "Did you pay for my college tuition? No, I took out crippling loans. Did you help me buy a reliable car so I could commute to my internships? No, I rode the city bus for 4 miserable years. Did you even manage to remember my birthday this week? No. You completely forgot it to plan a party for the son who literally makes 3 times what I do." Oliver slammed his open hand flat on the table, making the silverware jump. "Watch your damn mouth when you talk to our mother, Julian. If you are broke, struggling, and jealous of my success, just say so. Do not ruin my celebration with your pathetic, enduring victim complex." My father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor, towering over the end of the table. "You will wire that money, Julian, or you will no longer be welcome in this house. You have a strict duty to this family. Oliver is securing our legacy. He is the one carrying the weight of the Hayes name. You owe him your unwavering support." I stood up slowly, calmly tossing my linen napkin onto my half-eaten dessert. "Keep the house, Arthur." It always felt more like a museum than a home anyway. I turned and walked out the front door without looking back once. Behind me, I could hear my mother instantly start to weaponize her tears, sobbing loudly and theatrically about how I was aggressively tearing the family apart. I got into my car, gripped the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, and exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding for decades. The war had officially begun. They did not take my defiance lightly. Narcissists never, ever handle losing their grip on control gracefully. Monday morning, the storm followed me directly to my corporate sanctuary. I was in the middle of a high-stakes, closed-door strategy meeting with my senior team when my executive assistant, a sharp-eyed, no-nonsense woman named Brenda, knocked urgently on the glass door and slipped inside. "Julian, I am so sorry to interrupt," she whispered urgently. "Your father and your brother are down in the main lobby. They are demanding to see you, and they are causing a massive scene in front of the reception staff." I felt a massive spike of adrenaline flood my system, but I forced my face into an unreadable mask of professional calm. I excused myself and walked out to the expansive glass and steel reception area. My father was pacing the marble floor like a caged animal, looking furious in his bespoke suit, while Oliver stood beside him, clutching a leather briefcase. Standing right next to Oliver was Derek, a slimy rival account manager in my firm who had been actively trying to undermine my career for years. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, marching over and keeping my voice dangerously low so the wide-eyed receptionist would not hear. My father pointed a stiff finger directly at my chest. "You are going to fix your rebellious attitude right now, Julian. Oliver desperately needs a warm introduction to the CEO of the tech company you currently manage. We know you hold the primary account. Derek here was kind enough to explain the internal structure and that you have the direct, personal contact. You are going to hand over the client relationship to Oliver's financial firm right now. It is the absolute least you can do after massively disrespecting us last night." I stared at them, my mind racing to process the sheer audacity. They were actively trying to sabotage my career, risking a massive conflict of interest, just to feed Oliver's endless ambition. Derek smirked at me, clearly enjoying the fact that my own flesh and blood was willing to throw me under the corporate bus to help him steal my top-tier client. I looked at Oliver, shaking my head in disgust. "You really brought Daddy to my workplace to bully me into giving you a client because you do not have the skills to network yourself? You are pathetic." Oliver flushed bright red, his jaw clenching. "It is family business, Julian. Stop being a roadblock to my success." I turned my absolute fury onto Derek. "If you ever contact a member of my family again to discuss my confidential client accounts or my portfolio, I will have HR and our legal team draw up immediate termination papers and hit you with a lawsuit for breaching your NDA before you can even pack your desk. Are we absolutely clear?" Derek's arrogant smirk vanished instantly. He took a physical step back, suddenly realizing he had miscalculated my temperament. Then I turned back to my father. "This is a place of business. If you do not turn around and leave this building immediately, I will have building security escort you out for trespassing and harassment. I am not your employee, I am not your obedient servant, and I am certainly not Oliver's stepping stone." My father looked at me like he was seeing a complete stranger, his eyes wide with fury. "You are making a massive, life-altering mistake, boy. If you walk away now, you are cutting yourself off from your inheritance completely. I will rewrite the will tomorrow." "Keep it," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "I do not want a single dime of your bloody money. It always comes with a price tag I am no longer willing to pay." I turned on my heel and walked back through the heavy glass security doors. My hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline crash, but my mind was crystal clear. Later that afternoon, the CEO of our firm, Mr. Sterling, called me directly into his expansive corner office overlooking the city skyline. "Julian," he said warmly, gesturing for me to sit while he poured 2 cups of expensive black coffee from a silver carafe. "I saw a bit of what happened in the lobby on the security feeds, and I have also thoroughly reviewed the final numbers on the crisis management account you saved last week." I braced myself, my stomach dropping, wondering if my father's insane stunt had jeopardized my standing at the firm. "You are exceptional, Julian," Mr. Sterling said, handing me a cup and sitting across from me. "You operate with a level of integrity, grace under pressure, and sheer brilliance that is incredibly rare in this industry. That $82,000 bonus was just the beginning of your compensation package." I want to talk about putting you on the executive track. We are looking at a massive promotion and a significant salary bump by Q3. I walked out of that corner office feeling 10 feet tall. I had earned this. My family had absolutely zero part in it. That evening, instead of going straight to my empty, quiet apartment, I stopped at the third-floor unit of my building. I knocked gently on the door, and Mrs. Gable answered. She was an 84-year-old retired school teacher with soft silver hair, a slight stoop, and the kindest, most perceptive eyes I had ever known. We had a standing tradition of Monday night tea. "Right on time, my boy," she smiled warmly, stepping aside to let me in. "I have fresh ginger cookies cooling on the rack." Sitting at her small, checkered kitchen table, surrounded by her collection of vintage teacups, the heavy adrenaline of the day finally wore off. I told her everything. The ignored birthday, the horrific group chat, the extortion at dinner, the ambush at the office. I did not cry, but my voice carried the heavy, exhausting weight of a lifetime of relentless rejection. Mrs. Gable placed a warm, frail, spotted hand over mine. "Julian," she said softly, her voice full of ancient wisdom. "Some parents only know how to see their own reflection. They look at your brother, and they see the glorious image they desperately want the world to admire. They look at you, and they resent you because you refuse to be a quiet prop in their play. You cannot force blind people to see the sunset. You have to stop waiting for their applause. You have to start building your own stage." Her words hit me like a physical force, knocking the breath out of me. Start building your own stage. I walked back up to my apartment with a new, dangerous, and wildly exciting idea forming in my mind. I opened my laptop, bypassed all social media entirely, and typed 3 words into the search bar. Michigan real estate. I thought I was just looking to clear my head. I did not realize I was about to ignite a bomb that would burn the Hayes family facade entirely to the ground. The drive up to the rugged Michigan coastline took just over 2.5 hours, but with every single mile marker I passed on the highway, the oppressive, suffocating gravity of my family seemed to weaken its hold on my chest. I had taken a rare Friday off from the firm. The air outside the city limits was noticeably cleaner, smelling of damp earth, turning leaves, and the approaching autumn chill. I pulled my car into the long, gravel driveway of a property I had found online late Tuesday night during my furious real estate search. It was a stunning, sprawling 4-bedroom house sitting directly on the prime lakefront. The exterior was painted a deep, calming sage green that blended perfectly with the environment, featuring massive floor-to-ceiling windows and a breathtaking wraparound cedar deck. It was completely isolated, surrounded by ancient, towering pine trees that offered absolute privacy. It was the exact architectural and spiritual opposite of my father's sterile, imposing, cold brick mansion. Tom, the local real estate agent, was waiting for me on the front porch. He was a laid-back guy in his mid-50s who did not wear a suit, opting for khakis and a fleece vest, which I instantly appreciated. "Julian?" Tom asked, walking down the steps and shaking my hand firmly. "Glad you could make the drive up. The sellers are highly motivated to move this property. They are an older couple moving to a retirement community in Arizona for their joints. They want a clean, fast closing without any contingencies." We walked through the heavy front door. The interior smelled beautifully of old wood, cold lake air, and lemon polish. The massive main living room featured a towering stone fireplace that went all the way up to the vaulted ceiling. The master bedroom overlooked the water, where gentle waves lapped endlessly against a private, sturdy wooden dock. Every single step I took on the original hardwood floors felt like I was physically claiming territory. This was not just a house. It was a fortress of solitude, a place where my father's booming voice could not echo off the walls, and my mother's manipulative, weaponized tears held absolutely no currency. "How much are they asking?" I asked, standing on the back deck, watching a lone white sailboat cut silently across the distant horizon. "365,000, Tom said, leaning casually against the railing. "But given your income and credit with a solid down payment, I can get you a fantastic interest rate with the local bank. I turned to him, keeping my hands shoved deep in my pockets to hide the slight tremor of adrenaline. I do not want a mortgage, Tom. I am going to buy it in cash. A combination of my long-term savings and a massive recent corporate bonus. Can we get the legal paperwork drawn up and close in 2 weeks? Tom blinked, clearly stunned into silence. He looked at me, a young guy in faded jeans and a plain gray sweater, casually offering to drop over $250,000 in liquid cash. I can get the title company and the paperwork started this afternoon, he said, pulling out his tablet with a massive, disbelieving grin. For the next 2 weeks, I essentially lived a highly functional double life. At work, I was the aggressive, rising star, taking on complex new accounts, securing my promotion, and rapidly building my elite portfolio. On the weekends, I was a ghost. I drove up to Michigan in secret, meeting with lawyers, signing endless stacks of legal documents, transferring massive wire funds, and slowly moving my personal sanctuary into reality. I bought brand new furniture, heavy, comfortable leather couches, massive oak bookshelves, and a king-sized bed with the most expensive mattress I could find. I did not ask for a single piece of interior design advice from anyone. Every choice, down to the heavy vintage brass handles on the kitchen cabinets, was entirely, fiercely mine. I felt incredibly powerful. For the first time, I felt utterly untouchable. But I made one critical, nearly fatal mistake. I severely underestimated the insidious reach of the Hayes family espionage network. During my second week of homeownership, right before I had officially posted anything online, I met my cousin Chloe for coffee at a busy cafe in the city. Chloe was Oliver's exact age, but she had always positioned herself as the edgy rebel of the family. She complained endlessly about Aunt Beatrice's strict rules, and I falsely, stupidly believed we shared a deep, mutual understanding of the toxic family dynamics we had grown up in. Over expensive lattes, feeling the euphoric high of my new secret life, I let my guard down. I told her I bought a property in Michigan. I did not tell her the exact price or how I paid for it, but I told her it was my permanent escape plan from Arthur and Eleanor. Chloe smiled warmly, reaching across the small cafe table to squeeze my arm in a show of solidarity. Julian, I am so incredibly proud of you. You deserve a beautiful place of your own away from the madness. Do not worry, your secret is totally safe with me. 3 days later, my phone rang while I was standing on a ladder, hanging a heavy curtain rod in the lake house guest room. The caller ID flashed. It was Aunt Beatrice. I climbed down, wiped the dust off my hands, and answered, putting her on speakerphone while I organized my tools. Hello, Beatrice. Julian Hayes. Her voice shrieked through the tiny phone speaker, vibrating with absolute, unhinged venom. I just had a very long, very disturbing conversation with Chloe. You bought a house? A luxury vacation home? While your own brother is drowning in expenses for his new promotion and his anniversary party. I gripped the heavy metal screwdriver in my hand until my knuckles turned stark white. Chloe had completely sold me out for cheap gossip points with the family matriarchs. It is a primary residence, Beatrice, I said coldly, my voice dangerously calm. And my personal finances are absolutely none of your business. It is family business when you are selfishly hoarding wealth while aggressively refusing to support Oliver. She yelled, her voice echoing in my empty kitchen. Your father is furious. He is consulting his corporate lawyer about this right now. He thinks you embezzled money from your firm. How else could a single bachelor like you suddenly afford prime real estate? I laughed. A cold, hard, merciless laugh. Tell Arthur to call my firm's legal team. They will absolutely love having that conversation with him. Do not ever call this number again. I hung up and instantly blocked her contact. But the damage was already done. Chloe's betrayal was the tiny spark that lit the massive powder keg. My mother's text arrived exactly an hour later. Emergency family meeting. Sunday night, 7 p.m. sharp. You will be here, or we are coming directly to your office lobby with our lawyer on Monday morning. Do not test us, Julian. I stared at the threatening text message. The old version of me would have felt a massive spike of terror, rushing frantically to figure out how to appease them, how to explain myself, how to apologize for simply existing and succeeding. But the man standing in his own massive house, bought entirely with his own cash, felt absolutely nothing but cold, calculated resolve. I walked over to the stack of moving boxes I had brought from my city apartment. I pulled out 3 heavy, dust-covered, leather-bound photo albums. I wiped the dust off the covers with my sleeve. If they wanted a dramatic family meeting to put me on trial, I was going to give them a presentation with hard evidence they would never, ever forget. I packed the albums carefully into my leather duffel bag. The storm was coming, but I was no longer afraid of the rain. I was the one bringing the lightning. The drive back from my pristine sanctuary in Michigan to the toxic epicenter of my family in the wealthy suburbs of Chicago felt entirely different this time around. I was no longer the anxious, desperate son rushing back to grovel for a tiny scrap of validation. I was a senior corporate strategist executing a meticulously planned, long overdue operation. The heavy leather duffel bag sitting securely on my passenger seat held the physical, undeniable evidence of 32 years of systemic neglect and emotional abuse. I had spent my entire adult life desperately trying to avoid a massive, lawsuit-level confrontation with my parents. I had swallowed my pride, bitten my tongue, and accepted the absolute bare minimum just to keep the fragile peace. But tonight, the dynamic was completely flipped. Tonight, I was the one bringing the hard evidence to the courtroom, and I was entirely prepared to burn their carefully constructed narrative to the ground. I pulled my car onto the massive, sweeping aggregate driveway of the Hayes family mansion at exactly 6:55 on Sunday evening. The setting autumn sun cast long, imposing shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn, a lawn my father paid a small fortune to maintain just to impress the notoriously strict members of his local HOA meetings. Those dark shadows stretching across the grass used to make me feel incredibly small, attempting to pull me back into old, subservient patterns of behavior. Not tonight. I killed the engine, grabbed my heavy leather bag, and marched confidently up the wide granite steps. I did not reach into my pocket to use my old house key. I reached out and pressed the heavy brass doorbell. Tonight, I was not acting as a compliant member of this family. I was an adversarial witness arriving for a deposition. The heavy oak door swung open forcefully, revealing my father, Arthur. He stood there, all 6 feet and 2 inches of him framed perfectly in the grand, chandelier-lit entryway. His silver hair was perfectly combed, and he wore a crisp, expensive dress shirt, projecting his usual terrifying aura of absolute, unquestionable authority. His cold, calculating eyes flicked down to the heavy duffel bag in my hand, then back up to my face, his expression completely devoid of any warmth. "You are cutting it incredibly close, Julian," he said, his voice dripping with his trademark condescension. He turned his back immediately and walked toward the formal living room without waiting for a single response. There was no greeting. There was no handshake. There was just the immediate, crushing weight of his expectation that I would follow him like a loyal, obedient dog on a tight leash. I followed him slowly down the long hallway and stepped into the grand living room. The scene was set with terrifying, orchestrated precision. It looked exactly like a ruthless corporate ambush or a high-stakes intervention orchestrated by a hostile board of directors preparing to oust a failing executive. My mother, Eleanor, was seated stiffly on her favorite floral armchair, a pristine white tissue already clutched strategically in her right hand. Her makeup was carefully applied to make her look pale and deeply distressed, a masterclass in weaponized vulnerability that she had perfected over decades. Oliver and his picture-perfect wife, Sarah, sat closely together on the large velvet sofa. Oliver had his arms crossed tightly over his chest, sporting a look of supreme, untouchable arrogance, while Sarah whispered something into his ear, shooting me a look of pure disgust. But there was a new, unexpected addition to the family tribunal. Sitting quietly in the corner on a leather wingback chair, holding a yellow legal pad and an expensive pen, was my father's personal attorney. His name was Richard Sterling, a ruthless, incredibly expensive man who usually handled the family's aggressive real estate acquisitions complex estate planning, and the occasional threat of a lawsuit against contractors. I stopped dead in the center of the expensive Persian rug and dropped my heavy bag onto the hardwood floor. It made a loud, solid thud that echoed in the quiet room. "Let us get straight to the absolute point," my father began, standing tall by the ornate fireplace mantel to ensure he physically looked down on me. "We are completely appalled and disgusted by your recent erratic behavior. Buying a luxury property in Michigan without consulting the family is not just incredibly stupid. It is a massive, unforgivable liability. Richard is here because we are deeply concerned about the severe legal and financial ramifications of your reckless actions." My mother dramatically dabbed her perfectly dry eyes with her tissue, letting out a loud, shuddering breath. "Julian, you have humiliated us beyond words. The neighbors are asking incredibly uncomfortable questions. The women at the country club are whispering behind my back. People actually think you have lost your mind or gotten involved in something highly illegal. How could you possibly do this to your brother right before his big promotion celebration? You are deliberately trying to steal his joy." Oliver scoffed loudly, shaking his head with a condescending smirk. "You are completely pathetic, Julian. You bought a house you obviously cannot afford just to steal the spotlight from my success. Dad had to call Richard on a Sunday evening to figure out how to untangle whatever predatory, high-interest mortgage nightmare you just blindly signed. You are a complete embarrassment to the Hayes name." I slowly turned my attention to the lawyer, Richard. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and looked at me with a look of professional, detached pity. "Julian," he began, employing a smooth, practiced tone, "if you have leveraged yourself dangerously, or if you have somehow misappropriated corporate funds from your firm to secure this real estate, Arthur is prepared to step in and offer you a temporary, highly structured loan from his personal 401k to cover the immediate debt and prevent criminal charges. But the strict condition is that you sell the property immediately, sign the deed over to a family trust that Arthur controls, and allow your father to directly manage your salary and living expenses moving forward until you prove you are financially stable." I stood there, letting the absolute sheer audacity of their plan wash over me. They actually thought they had me completely cornered. They genuinely believed I was a financially illiterate, desperate child who had stumbled blindly into a massive disaster and needed them to swoop in and rescue me. They wanted to use my supposed catastrophic failure to strip away my financial independence, control my entire salary, and force me to sell my only sanctuary so the money could likely be funneled right back into the family estate to fund Oliver's lavish lifestyle. My father pointed a stiff, authoritative finger directly at my chest. "You are going to sign a comprehensive power of attorney agreement tonight, Julian. You have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that you cannot handle your own affairs. If you refuse my generous help, I will cut you out of the inheritance entirely. You will not see a single dime of the estate. You will be completely on your own, and when the bank forecloses on that shack, do not come crying to my door." The old version of Julian would have panicked internally. The old Julian would have scrambled to frantically explain, to apologize profusely, to beg them not to hate him, to promise he would do whatever it took to regain their highly conditional favor. The new Julian just smiled. It was a terrifying, cold, completely dead-eyed smile that caused Oliver to suddenly shift uncomfortably on the velvet sofa. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, my voice completely flat, devoid of any fear, submission, or respect. My father's face darkened instantly, the veins in his neck beginning to bulge. "Do not take that disrespectful tone with me in my own house, boy." I reached down and slowly unzipped the heavy leather duffel bag. "I do not care about your precious inheritance, Arthur. Keep it. Leave every single penny of it to Oliver so he can use it to pay for his inevitable future divorce settlement when Sarah finally realizes he is entirely financially dependent on his parents to maintain his fake lifestyle." Sarah gasped loudly, her hand flying to her mouth in utter shock. Oliver jumped up from the couch, his face turning bright, furious red. "You shut your damn mouth. You jealous loser. I will ruin you." "Sit down, Oliver," I commanded, projecting my voice from my diaphragm, using the exact same authoritative, booming tone my father used when he was enraged. And surprisingly, Oliver actually sat back down, completely shocked by the sheer physical force of my voice. I reached into the bag. You brought a lawyer to threaten me, but you are about to realize that you have made a catastrophic, completely irreversible miscalculation. I pulled the 3 heavy, leather-bound photo albums from the duffel bag and stacked them deliberately on the glass coffee table directly in front of my mother. Then, I reached deep back into the bag and pulled out a thick, professionally bound financial portfolio I had printed at my corporate office. The room was deathly quiet, the tension so incredibly thick it felt like trying to breathe underwater. You called this dramatic meeting because you actually think I am a massive failure who needs an aggressive intervention, I said, pacing slowly and confidently in front of the massive stone fireplace. You think I am reckless. You think I am desperately trying to steal the spotlight. You think I need your 401k money. I picked up the first, heaviest photo album and tossed it directly onto Oliver's lap. It hit his legs with a solid thud. Open it, I demanded, pointing a finger at him. Oliver hesitated, looking nervously at our father, who nodded curtly, clearly believing this was just a pathetic emotional outburst. Oliver slowly opened the heavy leather cover. That is your entire life, Oliver, I stated clearly, making sure the lawyer heard every single word. Pages upon pages of you. You blowing out towering cakes on your birthdays. You unwrapping incredibly expensive gifts. You standing proudly next to luxury cars Arthur bought for you without a second thought. Ages 6 through 35. Every single milestone meticulously documented, celebrated, and heavily funded by this family. I picked up the second album and handed it directly to my mother. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled slightly as she took the heavy book. Open it, Eleanor. Look at your handiwork. She opened the cover. Her eyes widened slightly. She slowly turned the thick, high-quality pages. One after another, empty, blank pages stared back at her. There were exactly 4 photographs in the entire book. One of me standing entirely alone in our old kitchen with a store-bought cupcake when I turned 12. One of me graduating high school, taken by a sympathetic teacher because my parents had left the ceremony early to beat the traffic. One of me hugging my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable, on my 30th birthday. Nothing else. The rest of the pages were a desolate wasteland. There is absolutely nothing in it, I explained, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous, icy whisper that commanded the entire room. Because there was absolutely nothing to document. On my 21st birthday, you were both in a different state touring extravagant wedding venues for Oliver. On my college graduation, you were busy finalizing the massive cash down payment for Oliver's starter home. You completely erased my existence. I picked up the third album and dropped it onto the glass table with a loud, aggressive crack that made Sarah jump. Family vacations, ski trips to Aspen, summer tours of Europe, extravagant Thanksgiving dinners at luxury resorts. I am not in a single one of those photos because you routinely left me behind with a cheap babysitter or at a discount summer camp, claiming the travel budget was simply too tight that year to accommodate 4 people. My father stepped forward, his jaw incredibly tight, his fists clenched at his sides. What is the ultimate point of this pathetic melodrama? Julian, you have always been highly sensitive and incredibly difficult. We provided a massive roof over your head. You are acting like a petulant, ungrateful child holding a pathetic grudge over a few missing photographs. The photographs are just the emotional introduction, Arthur, I said, staring him down. The point is hard, undeniable, legally sound evidence. I picked up the thick financial portfolio and tossed it directly at the lawyer, Richard. He caught it against his chest, looking completely bewildered by the shift in power. Open the portfolio, Richard, I said. As a highly paid legal professional who manages trusts and estates, you will deeply appreciate the meticulous, undeniable record-keeping. Richard Sterling adjusted his expensive glasses and opened the thick binder. That spreadsheet tracks family spending over the last 2 decades, I explained, projecting my voice like I was delivering a keynote presentation to a massive corporate board of directors. I went through old bank statements I had access to, public tax records, and family trust documents filed with the county. I tracked every single major expenditure. The massive college fund you drained. The luxury birthday gifts. The down payments on real estate. The quiet debt forgiveness when Oliver over-leveraged his credit cards. Richard's eyes scanned the documents rapidly, his professional, detached composure completely faltering as he flipped the pages and saw the highlighted numbers. "Read the bottom line out loud, Richard," I commanded. "Read the massive disparity between the two sons so everyone in this room understands the reality." Richard cleared his throat nervously, looking at my father with a panicked expression. "Arthur," he stammered, "this spreadsheet indicates you have disbursed roughly $750,000 to Oliver over the last 15 years for out-of-state tuition, luxury vehicles, massive wedding expenses, and real estate assistance. The column for Julian shows a total of roughly $12,000, which was mostly for basic medical insurance premiums during his college years." My mother started to cry, actual, genuine, heaving tears this time. "Julian, please," she sobbed loudly. "We did not mean to make it so unequal. We just wanted to make sure Oliver had a strong start in life. He is carrying the family name in the highly competitive finance world. We thought you were fine on your own. He is a massive financial parasite who cannot survive without Arthur's wallet." I corrected her sharply. "But that is not even the climax of this presentation. You brought Richard here today to untangle my supposed massive debt. You genuinely thought I took out a predatory loan. You thought I embezzled from my corporate clients and was facing a massive criminal lawsuit." I reached into the inside breast pocket of my blazer and pulled out a single sheet of heavy, watermarked legal paper. It was the official, certified closing document and deed for the Lake House property in Michigan. I walked over and placed it directly on top of the spreadsheet resting in Richard's lap. "Tell my father exactly how I financed that beautiful house. Richard, read the terms." The lawyer looked down at the document. He traced the printed lines with his index finger. His eyes widened significantly behind his glasses. He looked up at me, absolutely stunned, then looked over at Arthur. "Arthur," Richard said, his voice completely devoid of its former arrogance, replaced by genuine shock. "There is absolutely no mortgage. There is no predatory loan. There is no debt whatsoever. The property was purchased for $365,000. It was paid entirely in a single verified cash wire transfer directly from Julian's personal checking account. He holds the deed free and clear." My father physically recoiled as if he had been violently struck in the face by an invisible hand. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. "Cash?" he finally sputtered, his voice weak. "You paid cash? Where the hell did you get that kind of money? You are a mid-level marketing employee." "I am a senior corporate strategist, Arthur," I said, relishing the taste of every single syllable. "You have never once bothered to ask what I actually do for a living because you were entirely too busy worshipping Oliver's incredibly mediocre finance career. Last week, I saved a global tech conglomerate from a catastrophic public relations disaster. My firm compensated me with an $82,000 performance bonus. Combine that with the massive, untouched savings account I built because I never spent a single dime on country club memberships or luxury cars to impress people I hate, and I had more than enough liquid capital to buy that sanctuary outright." I turned my absolute fury onto Oliver. His face was completely, deathly pale. The smug, untouchable arrogance had been entirely wiped away, replaced by the horrifying, undeniable realization that his invisible, supposedly pathetic younger brother was infinitely more successful and financially secure than him. "You actually wanted me to pay $20,000 for your anniversary car, Oliver?" I asked, my voice dripping with pure, unadulterated acid. "I could buy 3 of those cars right now in cash and not even notice the minor dent in my checking account. But I will never, ever give you a single cent. You are a grown man playing pretend with our father's credit card, entirely dependent on his approval to survive." Oliver opened his mouth to speak, to defend himself, but absolutely no words came out. He just stared blankly at the closing document resting in Richard's hands. My father finally recovered his voice. His face turned a dangerous, violent shade of crimson. "How dare you?" he roared, stepping aggressively toward me, pointing his shaking finger inches from my face. "You arrogant, ungrateful little bastard. You come into my house. You insult your grieving mother. You disrespect your successful brother. And you flaunt your money like some cheap lottery winner?" I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground, looking down slightly into his furious, bulging eyes. "I am not flaunting my money, Arthur," I said coldly. "I am establishing a massive, impenetrable boundary. You wanted to know exactly why I bought the house. I bought it so I would never, ever have to rely on you for a single thing. I bought it to prove that I survived your incredibly toxic, narcissistic parenting." My mother let out a loud, theatrical wail, burying her face completely in her hands. "We gave you a beautiful life. We gave you absolutely everything. You gave me massive psychological damage and a deep inferiority complex that took years of expensive therapy to untangle." I yelled back, my voice finally cracking like thunder in the large room, silencing her cries. "You desperately wanted a golden child and a scapegoat. You actively chose Oliver to carry your precious, fragile legacy, and you chose me to carry your emotional garbage. Well, I am officially done carrying it." I turned back to my father, who was breathing heavily. "What do you want from me now, Arthur? You want to officially disinherit me? Do it. Call Richard tomorrow morning and write me completely out of the family will. I do not want your dirty money. I do not want your fake approval. I have spent 32 miserable years waiting for you to look at me the way you look at Oliver. I am officially done waiting." My father stood entirely frozen in place. The absolute, crushing realization that he had completely lost all leverage, all financial control, and all emotional power over me was visibly washing over his face. Narcissists completely crumble when they realize they can no longer pull your strings or use your fear against you. I reached down and picked up my empty duffel bag. I deliberately left the photo albums and the explosive financial portfolio sitting on the table. "Keep the albums," I said, my voice returning to a calm, dead flat tone. "Keep the spreadsheet. Consider them my final, parting contribution to the Hayes family legacy. If any of you ever attempt to contact me again, if you show up at my corporate office, or if you try to spread vicious rumors about my finances to your country club friends, I will legally publish that massive spreadsheet on every single social media platform I have. I will completely ruin your pristine public image in a single afternoon. Do not ever test me again." I turned my back on them and walked out of the living room. Behind me, the silence was absolute and profound. Nobody called my name. Nobody tried to physically stop me. The heavy oak front door closed behind me with a loud, definitive click that echoed like a gunshot in the cool evening air. I walked purposefully down the driveway to my car, got in, and started the engine. My hands were perfectly steady on the steering wheel. I did not cry. I did not feel an ounce of guilt. For the first time in my entire existence, I felt utterly, completely, and terrifyingly free. The immediate aftermath of a massive, foundation-shattering family explosion is never quiet. Toxic families do not just let their favorite, designated scapegoat walk away without desperately trying to launch a massive, coordinated smear campaign to protect their own fragile egos. But they severely underestimated my absolute, unwavering commitment to cutting them off completely. The minute I crossed the city limits and hit the dark highway heading back to my sanctuary in Michigan, I pulled my car over onto the gravel shoulder. I took out my phone and systematically, ruthlessly blocked everyone. I blocked my father, my mother, Oliver, Sarah, Aunt Beatrice, and my traitorous cousin Chloe. I blocked them on my phone, routing their calls directly to a dead voicemail box. I blocked them on my personal email, my work email, and across every single social media platform. I essentially wiped their digital existence from my universe in less than 5 minutes. Over the next few weeks, the fallout was spectacular. I heard through the grapevine, mostly through distant, nosy relatives who were entirely too curious to stay quiet, that Aunt Beatrice had aggressively tried to launch a massive gossip offensive. She tried to tell the wealthy country club circuit and anyone who would listen at their lavish Thanksgiving dinners that I had suffered a severe mental breakdown. She spread rumors that I had bought a dilapidated, rotting shack in the woods using highly dangerous, illegal loans, and that my father was desperately trying to secure legal custody of my finances to save me from myself. But my father, absolutely terrified of my explicit threat to publicly publish the financial spreadsheet, aggressively shut her down. The sheer, absolute fear of public humiliation, the exposure of his blatant financial favoritism, and the potential of a defamation lawsuit from my firm's legal team kept Arthur completely silent. The narrative within the family rapidly shifted. Without me there to constantly absorb their anger, frustration, and impossible expectations, the toxic dynamic in their house began to collapse in on itself like a dying star. Oliver, no longer able to constantly compare himself favorably to his supposedly struggling younger brother, began to face massive, unprecedented scrutiny from Arthur regarding his actual financial independence. The golden child was finally feeling the crushing, suffocating weight of the crown. Arthur demanded to know why Oliver, a chief financial officer, still needed the family trust to pay for his luxury car leases and his wife's extravagant shopping habits. The manufactured peace in the mansion completely shattered. Meanwhile, I was actively thriving in the absolute, beautiful silence of my new life. My Michigan lake house became my impenetrable fortress and my dedicated healing ground. I spent my weekends completely transforming the massive space. I hung framed awards from my successful corporate campaigns on the walls of my home office, proudly displaying the salary and success I had earned entirely on my own. I built a massive stone fire pit down by the water's edge. I learned how to cook proper, complex meals in my massive kitchen, instead of surviving on cheap, cold takeout eaten over a kitchen sink. A month after the explosive confrontation, I hosted my first official dinner party at the lake house. I did not invite a single blood relative. I invited the people who had actually, consistently shown up for me when I had nothing to offer them in return. My CEO, Mr. Sterling, drove up from the city in his personal car, bringing an incredibly expensive bottle of vintage Cabernet and a genuine smile. My best friend and colleague, Marcus, arrived with his wife, bringing a massive housewarming plant and a cooler full of local craft beer. And I drove into the city specifically to pick up Mrs. Gable, my 84-year-old neighbor, ensuring she traveled in absolute comfort in the passenger seat of my car. We sat around the massive custom-built dining table, eating perfectly grilled steaks, laughing loudly, and drinking excellent wine. The stone fireplace crackled warmly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The lake outside the massive floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the bright, silver moonlight. Mrs. Gable sat next to me, her silver hair shining beautifully in the firelight. After dinner, as we were pouring coffee, she reached into her large canvas tote bag and pulled out a soft, beautifully wrapped package tied with a simple ribbon. "For the new house, Julian," she said, her eyes crinkling with deep, genuine affection. "Every home needs something made with actual love, not just bought thoughtlessly with a platinum credit card or handed down from an inheritance." I unwrapped it carefully, pulling away the paper. It was a massive, incredibly detailed handmade quilt. It was stitched in beautiful, calming shades of deep blue, forest green, and slate gray to perfectly match the aesthetic of the lake house bedroom. I ran my hands over the soft fabric, feeling the hundreds of hours of careful labor she had poured into it just for me. I looked at her, and for the first time since this entire agonizing ordeal began, my eyes filled with hot, uncontrollable tears. I stood up from my chair and hugged her tightly, burying my face in her shoulder. She patted my back with a steady, rhythmic, unconditional warmth that I had desperately craved my entire life but never received from my own mother. "You built a beautiful stage, my boy," she whispered in my ear. "Now enjoy the play. You have earned every bit of this piece." The contrast was incredibly stark and undeniable. In my father's massive, cold mansion, surrounded by millions of dollars of trust fund money, inheritance promises, and luxury cars, I was utterly starving for basic human affection. Here, in a house I bought with my own hard-earned salary, surrounded by colleagues, true friends, and a surrogate mother, my cup was completely, overwhelmingly full. I had successfully, surgically removed the cancer of my toxic family from my life. Now, it was time to actively heal the remaining tissue and figure out who Julian Hayes was without the weight of their expectations dragging him down. Exactly 1 year passed. Time is a brilliant, patient architect when you finally give it a clean, stable foundation to build upon. It was a crisp, bright Tuesday morning. Exactly 1 year since the miserable, forgotten birthday that triggered the massive explosion. I was officially 33 years old. I woke up in my massive master bedroom, wrapped in Mrs. Gable's quilt, looking out at the calm, glassy surface of Lake Michigan reflecting the morning sun. The corporate world had heavily rewarded my intense focus and newfound confidence. 2 weeks prior, Mr. Sterling had officially promoted me to Senior Director of Strategy. My salary had nearly doubled. My investment portfolio was bulletproof. I was managing teams and handling the firm's largest clients. But more importantly, my internal, psychological landscape was entirely different. I had spent the last year aggressively working with a brilliant, no-nonsense therapist named Dr. Eris. Together, we spent hours dismantling the deeply ingrained generational patterns of guilt, forced obligation, and the desperate, pathetic need for parental validation that had chained me to my father's approval. I was hosting a massive birthday barbecue on my deck that afternoon. Marcus was already outside, setting up the massive grill and organizing the patio furniture. Coworkers were arriving in groups, carrying coolers of craft beer, covered dishes, and wrapped gifts. The energy buzzing around the house was electric, vibrant, and completely, undeniably authentic. I was standing at the kitchen island, happily slicing fresh fruit, when I heard the unmistakable, aggressive, throaty rumble of a high-performance engine coming slowly down my long gravel driveway. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel, my heart rate spiking slightly, and walked to the front window. A sleek, midnight black Porsche Panamera had just parked near the edge of the tree line, far away from the other cars. My stomach tightened instinctively. I knew exactly who drove that specific luxury car. It was the car my father had ultimately helped buy. The driver's side door opened slowly, and Oliver stepped out onto the gravel. He was wearing a casual designer sweater, but he looked incredibly tired and worn down. The arrogant, untouchable golden aura he usually carried like a shield was completely gone. He looked much older, slightly heavier, and deeply, profoundly stressed. He walked slowly toward the front porch, hesitating with every step, carrying a small, flat package wrapped in plain brown paper. I walked out the front door and stood on the porch, leaning casually against the heavy wooden pillar. I did not invite him inside. I did not smile. "Julian," he said, stopping at the bottom of the wooden steps, looking up at me. "Oliver," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly neutral, showing zero emotion. "You are trespassing on private property." He swallowed hard, looking down at his expensive shoes, clearly uncomfortable being out of his element. I know you blocked us entirely. I am not here to cause a scene, to demand anything, or to argue. I needed to give you this, in person. I could not mail it." He held out the flat package. I did not move to take it. I just stared at him. "Why are you here, Oliver?" I asked, my voice hard. He let out a long, shaky breath, running a hand through his hair. "The last year has been an absolute nightmare, Julian. Without you there to absorb Dad's insane expectations and his constant rage, he turned it all entirely on me. The aggressive demands, the absolute control over my career choices, the constant, daily threats about cutting me out of the inheritance if I do not do exactly what he says. I am drowning, Julian. My marriage to Sarah is hanging by a thread. We are practically discussing divorce because she cannot handle his meddling. I finally see exactly what you survived all those years. I am living in the cage he built, and I hate it." He looked up at me, and for the first time in our entire lives, there was absolutely no superiority in his eyes. There was no condescension, only deep, profound regret and exhaustion. "I always knew they actively ignored you to focus entirely on me," Oliver admitted, his voice cracking slightly, the facade finally breaking. I knew it was incredibly wrong. Even when we were kids, I knew it. But I was so terrified of losing the privileges, so terrified of Dad turning his anger on me, that I stayed quiet. I let them erase you so I could shine in the spotlight. I am a coward, Julian. I chose comfort over my own brother. And I am so incredibly sorry. I stood there on the porch, listening to the exact words I had literally begged God to hear for 3 decades. The apology was real. The regret was incredibly palpable. But intense therapy had taught me a brutal, essential truth. An apology does not automatically grant you access to my life. It does not erase the past. I walked slowly down the steps and carefully took the package from his trembling hands. I tore away the brown paper. Inside was a beautiful, professionally framed photograph. It was a picture I had never seen before. It was me, at exactly 7 years old, wearing faded jeans, sitting high up in an old oak tree in our childhood backyard, laughing brightly at something entirely outside the frame. I looked genuinely happy, carefree, and vibrantly alive. I found the negative hidden in a box in the attic last month, Oliver explained softly. I took it to a specialist and had it restored and framed. I wanted you to have absolute proof that you existed in that house, that you were happy once, even when the rest of us were entirely too blind and selfish to look at you. My throat tightened painfully. It was the most profound, deeply meaningful thing my brother had ever done for me in 33 years. Thank you, Oliver, I said softly, tracing the edge of the frame. I appreciate the photograph. Truly, it means a lot to me. I stepped back up onto the porch, creating physical distance between us. But I am not ready to unblock your number, and I am not inviting you to the party out back. I forgive you for being a coward. I genuinely do, but I am still aggressively protecting my peace, and you are still tied to Arthur. Oliver nodded slowly, accepting the firm boundary without a single argument or complaint. I understand, Julian. I really do. Happy birthday. You built a beautiful life here. You earned it. He turned around and walked back to his Porsche. As he opened the heavy car door, he paused and looked back toward the dense tree line near the main county road. She insisted on riding up with me, he said quietly, pointing toward the trees. She promised not to cross onto the property line without your explicit permission. Oliver got into his car, started the engine, and drove slowly away, the sound fading into the distance. I looked toward the trees. Standing exactly at the edge of the property line, clutching her designer purse tightly against her chest, was my mother, Eleanor. She looked incredibly small, frail, and entirely stripped of her haughty country club armor. She held a small, white bakery box in her trembling hands. I walked slowly across the massive, freshly cut lawn until I stood exactly 10 feet away from her. I did not cross the property line to meet her. Julian, she whispered, her voice breaking immediately as tears spilled over her cheeks. What is in the box, Eleanor? I asked, my voice steady. She opened the cardboard lid with violently shaking fingers. Inside was a single, massive piece of carrot cake. There was one unlit blue candle resting on top of the frosting. You always loved carrot cake when you were little, she said, crying quietly, the makeup running down her face. I remembered. I finally remembered your favorite. I looked at the cake. It was a tiny, pathetic gesture attempting to bridge a massive, terrifying canyon of neglect and emotional abuse. But it was real. She had finally stopped performing for an audience and started genuinely trying to seek forgiveness. I took a deep breath of the crisp, clean lake air. The burning anger was completely gone. The desperate, pathetic need for her conditional love was entirely gone. I just saw a sad, deeply flawed woman finally realizing the immense, irreversible cost of her own terrible choices. You can leave the box on the large rock, Mom, I said softly. I will eat it later tonight. But you need to go back to the city now. She nodded, sobbing quietly, obediently placing the box on a large landscaping rock near the road. She looked at me one last time, her eyes filled with sorrow, turned around, and began the long walk down the shoulder of the road to call a private car service to take her back to her empty mansion. I picked up the bakery box and walked back toward the lake house. the loud sounds of my friends laughing, the smell of barbecue smoke, and the warm, vibrant energy of my chosen family washed over me like a healing wave. That night, after the massive party finally wound down and everyone had gone inside to sleep or headed to their local hotels, I walked alone down to the very end of my private wooden dock. The water was completely black, perfectly reflecting the brilliant, expansive canopy of stars above Michigan. I set the piece of carrot cake down on the wooden planks. I pulled a lighter from my pocket and lit the single candle. The small flame flickered defiantly against the dark, cool wind sweeping off the lake. Last year, I spent my birthday staring at a blank phone screen in a dark apartment, hoping desperately for a toxic family to suddenly become capable of love. Tonight, I was surrounded by immense true wealth, genuine friendships, a thriving career, and absolute, unbreakable boundaries. I raised a heavy glass of expensive bourbon to the dark water, toasting the reflection of the strong, resilient, unbroken man I had forced myself to become. I blew out the candle, watching the smoke drift up into the night sky. Validation does not come from the people who gave you life. Validation begins entirely within. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me